Well, Oregon had a wide receiver decommitment recently by Adrian Wilson. So are they going after five-star Dakorien Moore? Let's talk to Brian Smith. Here we go.
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, it is that time once again for Locked On Ducks. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view every day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your number one source to stay up to date with the Ducks. If you have not already, like, comment, subscribe, rate, and review, please, and thank you wherever you listen to or watch this show, which today is brought to you by our friends at Nissan. Are you the kind of driver that likes to push things a little further? Ever wonder what adventure could be around the next corner? Take the Nissan Rogue, Nissan Pathfinder, or Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure. Check them all out today at nissanusa.com. Brian Smith is here, our Locked On Recruiting Insider here at the network, brought to you, of course, by our friends at LinkedIn Jobs. Brian, Adrian Wilson decommitted from the Ducks. Talented player, to be sure. I didn't have the approach of, oh, good riddance, that guy is terrible, because I'm sure you could watch his film and think, yeah, he's a pretty talented guy. But, you know, a thought that a couple of Oregon fans had, and then I had as a result, and want to ask you about now is, do you think this means Oregon will ratchet up their pursuit of 2025 five-star wideout and current LSU verbal commit Dakorien Moore?
I think that is probably going to be as ratcheted up as it can be anyway, because he's a game changer. I was actually speaking about him with John Garcia Jr. the other day. Somebody that's been on this show before. Mm-hmm. We're both like, yeah, I can see why you'd rank him number one receiver. we were just kind of talking about different guys. We're like, yeah, well, I'm okay with it. So, yeah, but they also know that they've done a really good job of recruiting receivers. Last year's season is going to be a selling point. Look, the kid we're talking about, Adrian's a good player. They have a shot at Moore. They're going to go after him with everything they have. They're going to get an OV. They're in the race until the end. But they're going to get somebody else, even if they get Moore, that'll probably just as good as Adrian, at very least. The least of the Ducks' worries will be receiver after last season. I'm sorry. If you're an Oregon fan is worried about it, you should stop now. Dakorien, I don't care where he commits or doesn't commit. Oregon's going to recruit him through December, whatever the signing date is. But he's right there on the cusp. They might actually flip him. It's possible.
Yeah, I don't think Duck fans have been, too worried about the decommitment there. Like it happens. It's just something that happens basically every recruiting cycle at almost every major program. Somewhere, I'm sure I'm sure there are schools that have had individual classes where no one has decommitted. I actually thought last year Oregon did a really good job of not having anyone flip away on National Signing Day, whereas they did. Hard. Yeah, really yeah, and most notably, that happened with Dante Moore in the 2023 class. But last year, everyone that Oregon had committed going into that early signing day in December, they all stayed committed to the Ducks, which I think is really, really good. And, we've talked at length on this show many, many times about this staff's recruiting prowess and what they're capable of. And I look at a guy like Dakorien Moore and say, look, he's not from anywhere that close to Oregon. LSU already has him committed, but I think it is telling about where Oregon is at recruiting-wise at this position that they're absolutely in the mix for a guy of this caliber.
If you're Oregon and you're getting him on campus multiple times, that's all you can really ask for. You could only lead the horse to water. Texas wants him, LSU wants him, and the rest of the free world also wants him on their roster. So, I mean, Oregon's one of like four schools. And, that's good enough for right now. Because, again, I do not care if he commits to somebody else, decommits from LSU, whatever. This is a race till signing day. That's a kid that the coaches are not going to care where he is or isn't committed. And he is a game changer. He will come in and start at a lot of programs. Oregon could be one. He is that good. So, Oregon to be in the position they're in now, especially being a West Coast school for a kid that's from Texas, look, that's about as good as it can get.
Is Oregon the only West Coast school that's going after him?
I would be shocked if Southern Cal is not, because like him in that offense, I'm not a Southern Cal fan, but I understand. If you're a receiver, that would be pretty attractive, I would think. So I'm sure that everybody has offered him out there, but I don't think the Trojans are in the mix as it stands currently. But in recruiting, things change rather quickly. So just keep that in mind.
When you have a guy like this who's already verbally committed to LSU, and you've got the early signing day that is all the way in December. So this could stretch out over a very long period of time until he, actually puts pen to paper. But is there a date, a time, a window that you feel Oregon fans should kind of monitor as it pertains to his recruitment where, if he hasn't decommitted by this date, or if he has, then, it gives Oregon a better or worse chance? Is there a timeline on that sort of move?
Potentially, I would say that's number two behind this. Does he, whether he makes another decision this summer, I have no idea. Does he plan to take a visit to Oregon in the fall? We talked about this last year with some of the 4 and 5 star kids. You got to get them back on campus, whether they're committed to you or not. If it's like a high 4-star, 5-star kid, because you think Kirby Smart's going to stop? Do you think Brian Kelly? Do you think Mario Cristobal? All these coaches around the country, it's their job. The number one thing in college football by a landslide is recruiting. It is not even competitive with anything else. I think it's 80% of the sport because the teams that are winning, there's 3 or 4 positions they dominate at and they just go steamroll everybody. We know who those schools are. And Oregon's on that cusp. Well, if you're recruiting for those kids, you got to deal with that part. If they get more on campus this summer, and then whether he commits or not, you still have to look at it like he's not committed. You need him to come back for whatever game it is, the Ohio State game or whatever, and you do something of that nature. And I'm not an Oregon fan, but if I was a high school kid, I'm like, yeah, sure, I'll go. I'm sure that he would look at it. Why would you not? That has to be their approach. You got to recruit him the entire way.
So you talked earlier about, what Oregon just did on the field with wide receivers, 2,000-yard receivers. That's the first time it's happened since the late 20th century in Eugene. Oregon hadn't seen any 1,000-yard receivers since Dylan Mitchell in 2018. They come out and in what is quote-unquote a dink and dunk offense, put up 2,000-yard seasons and set program records. Troy Franklin for receiving yards and touchdowns, and Tez Johnson for receptions. And they had the same number of receptions at the end of the regular season, or Franklin might have had one more. How big of an impact does that have? Because wide receiver has not been a position where Oregon has consistently churned out all conference or NFL caliber talent. But when you have a foundational kind of season like that, and you show the development of a guy like Troy Franklin is about to get taken in, the first or second round of the NFL draft, what sort of an impact does that have on recruiting that position?
Kids have the memory of a gnat when it comes to football stuff. Like, you can say, do you remember when Florida State was good in the 90s? Or be like, I wasn't alive. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
You got to be realistic. The last 5 years is about the only thing they know or care about for the most part, maybe 6 or 7. So yes, it's very relevant. And Franklin's a guy that's going to play in the NFL, play. That matters. They want to see guys getting checks, and they want to see guys on ESPN highlights. A to B, brother. That's the biggest recruiting tool. And I know Dan's a great recruiter. He's got a great staff, blah, blah, blah. That will help them more than anything. You can take that with any position, but receiver, let's be honest, what sells is the passing game. That's why the NFL, if you look at a receiver, the DB gets the flag, they try to push passing game. That's what these kids want to see. And if your school is sending kids to the league or even going to the combine and this and that, you can pump out videos and stuff and send recruiting literature about it. It's going to help. And then it's still Oregon too. They're a nationally relevant program. It's going to be top 5 pretty much in every preseason poll. Added with that, I would think it's pretty easy sell to go with the receiver anywhere in the country to get him out to Eugene.
Well, the guy who's been coaching those receivers, of course, Junior Adams, just got an extension and a little bit of a raise. I want Brian's thoughts there to be sure. After I share you my thoughts about Nissan, because this week's March Madness bracket highlight is brought to you by our friends at Nissan. Each week we're picking one team that stands out, a team that's pushed it further than the rest, just like any of the all-new 2024 Nissan SUVs. These guys were able to take it to the next level. The North Carolina Tar Heels are the Nissan Armada. This one seat is as hardcore as it gets out there, and it's no wonder they've secured a spot in the Sweet 16 against Alabama in the NCAA tournament. The Iowa State Cyclones are the Nissan Pathfinder. Thrilling to watch, and they've created a lane for themselves entering the tournament as one of the hottest teams. They've got Illinois in the Sweet 16, and the NC State Wolfpack are the Nissan Rogue. They win their conference tournament, surprised us all. They're in the Sweet 16 against Marquette. They say win life, go Rogue. That's exactly what NC State has done here. Take the Nissan Rogue, Nissan Pathfinder, or Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure. Shop at nissanusa.com. This episode also brought to you by our friends at Better Together. Is your bracket already busted? Mine is. Are you tired of the same old daily fantasy grind where you make a roster, cross your fingers, and hope for the best, or losing on the last leg of your pick'em entry? Introducing Better Together, the first cooperative daily fantasy platform where teamwork triumphs talent and you can play with your friends, not against them. Pick more or less on real-time player stats, strategize with your partner to boost your odds, and climb the leaderboard together. So grab a friend and join the social daily fantasy sports movement. Download Better Together now from the App Store and sign up using promo code LOCKEDON for a chance to win your share of over $1,000 in cash prizes. It's that easy. To get a chance for it, remember the code LOCKEDON when you download Better Together from the App Store. Code LOCKEDON. Winning alone is fun, but it's better together. All right, Brian, so Junior Adams recently got an extension and a raise. He and Carlos Lachlan have really been, I think, just ace recruiters offensively. Will Stein, of course, at the quarterback's position and offensive coordinator role has been great as well. But I think as position coaches, arguably on either side of the ball, those two have been the strongest names for Oregon, and their pedigree on the trail is well established at this point. When I tell you Junior Adams, as a co-OC and wide receivers coach, gets an extension and a raise, your reaction to that is what?
He should. I mean, did you see what they did last year? I mean, they were very technically sound. Everybody knew their offense, and they still did it anyway. That's the definition of technique, consistency, mindset, the whole 9 yards. Okay, Troy was really good, but they had other guys. If they doubled him, they found ways around it too. His backup and everybody else got playing time. They moved guys around. He was the key guy, but they didn't care if it was the running back in the flat, if it was the tight end, whatever it was. Their passing game worked in conjunction with the running game very well. They were a pain to defend. And his guys were blocking in the running game, like all the little things that will get you a raise and eventually get you a head job, he's doing. He's headed in the right direction, man, and good for him. Oregon, their fans should be happy that he got there. I mean, my guess is he's gone in a year or two, like most really good young coaches, but that means that he's done good things for Oregon too. So it's a win-win.
His extension on his contract keeps him with Oregon through 2026 if he plays it out and someone doesn't come in and buy him out. And, I haven't seen his name, even though he's a co-offensive coordinator. I think that's more of a signatory title.
Sure.
Like being the Queen of England or something. It's like, well, you have the name, but like, what are you really, are you making decisions on policy? Like, not really, right? So I have a great understanding of the British monarchy, obviously. So I think that for Junior Adams, he's been a part of a wildly productive offense, one of the best in the country each of the last 2 years. He is recruited at a very high level. He's not the oldest guy in college football. He's got a track record going back to Washington or coaching Cooper Kupp at Eastern Washington as well. Is it a guarantee in your view that in a year or two he opts for an offensive coordinator position, or are there guys like, Oregon legend Gary Campbell, who was the running backs coach for 30 some odd years, who are just happy to be a position coach?
Every now and then there's a guy like that. Odell Higgins has been the D-line coach at Florida State for like 30 years. It's just every now and then there's a guy like, how do you predict something like that? Most guys aspire to call the final play of the game. That's just, and the money comes with it. But on the other side of it, think of it this way. Late 80s into early 90s, head coaches were making like $100K. Head coaches. The world has changed.
Yeah.
Head coaches make more than that on a Saturday now. Literally. So it's interesting because assistants, $400,000 or $500,000 as a position coach, it's not unusual. There are coordinators making over $2 million. So you could look at it a lot of ways, but most head coaches are micromanaging fools when it comes to media. They don't let their coaches around dealing with that stuff. It's not all that bad. You don't deal with the media. You don't get yelled at as much. You make a lot of money, and he gets to hang out and wear Nike swag as an Oregon coach. Life is not all that bad. So if he stuck around a little longer, it makes sense. Part of that is family situation. Like, does your wife, your kid, I assume Eugene is very friendly, and of course the money's there. And, Phil Knight probably makes sure all that stuff is great. If he stayed a little longer, it wouldn't shock me. But Oregon's a pretty unique example too.
Yeah, it is. And I think James Crepey of the Oregonian reported that his salary was somewhere now in the $650,000 to $700,000 range.
Pretty good coin.
As a wide receivers coach is not bad. It's not bad. And look, he is proven, as I've talked about on the show, to be worth the investment. I mean, 2,000-yard receivers in the same year. And then you look at the way they're recruiting. Last year, they pulled Ryan Pelham, flipped him from USC. They pulled Jeremiah McLaughlin, flipped him from Ohio State. They land Gatlin Bear after Jim Harbaugh went to the NFL, and he's going on a 2-year mission, but that guy is going to be a big-time player. Now they're after Dakorien Moore. I feel like Adams kind of deserves the credit for, starting at least a progression in this position for the Ducks, because Oregon has been, running back you out west for my entire life. I mean, they've never lacked in the running back position. I think if you ask most Duck fans, and drop your thoughts in the YouTube comments, Oregon fans, because I'm curious, who you'd say the worst running backs Oregon's had in the last 2 decades have been, you'd probably lean towards C.J. Verdell and Travis Dye. And guess what? Both of those guys put up 1,000-yard seasons. They were not slouches. They were not bums. They just weren't, maybe the most talented compared to some others, though I always thought Travis Dye was very good. But, where the running back position has been very, very strong, the receiver group has not always been as strong. You think of those Justin Herbert teams, they didn't have great receivers. I mean, Johnny Johnson had a cup of coffee in the NFL, and that was kind of it. And Dylan Mitchell, same sort of thing. And those were the 2 best guys that Herbert ever had. So, we'll close on Junior Adams with this question, Brian. How sustainable do you think it is when, Oregon doesn't have a brand as a wide receiver school? How impactful can, the Troy Franklin move and all these recruiting wins sort of be to increase the level of play at that position?
There's only 4 or 5 schools that really do. I mean, Ohio State and LSU right now.
Right, of course.
Those 2, I mean, it's just dumb.
Yeah.
Alabama's 2019 receiver corps might have been the best I've ever seen.
Last year's Washington team for the last 2 years, those guys are all good.
Yeah. But, I mean, that's pretty much, I mean, even like Georgia, I mean, it was Brock Bowers. Like Florida State, Miami are inconsistent. There aren't many teams year to year it's good. Like Clemson had that little run, like 15 to 20, but they also had ridiculous quarterbacks. Like you could have caught a couple balls. I think if Blondie was throwing you the football, if he didn't break your hands with the pass, you'd have been okay. There really aren't. So what have you done in the last year or so matters. Like I saw Alabama last year on the field. They were pretty pedestrian at receiver. Isaiah Bond transferred to Texas. That's the other school right now because they got a certain head coach that knows passing game that I like. Dakorien, if he ended up at Texas, wouldn't shock me, and I'd understand. That's in-state, a great passing team. But Oregon's just as competitive as anybody because here recently, last year too, outside of Ohio State wasn't Ohio State last year. You had one guy that just dominated. They weren't unbelievable. LSU was the best, and they lost both those guys. Florida State had 2 really guys. They're gone. I mean, there's not any one school that's consistent. So why not Oregon? And they have so much to sell. If he stays a couple of years, they could absolutely put up a couple really good recruiting classes. And even if he leaves, the next guy is set for Bear.
Last thing for you here, Brian, is a guy on the other side of the ball in the 2025 class, DJ Pickett. I know you were very, very high on him, 5-star defensive back who can kind of play all over the place. Oregon, I believe, was able to lock in a visit with him. They've been on the radar for Pickett. What kind of is the latest for another 5-star in the 2025 cycle?
I think he'll end up at LSU, Miami, or Oregon. I know him pretty well, but he's just kind of done with media. And I don't blame him. He's been in the media hunt since 8th grade, literally. So he's a rare kid. 6'4" corners don't grow on trees. And I did say 6'4". I meant that. And he's a kid that is just as rare as, he's a big dude. He's good at everything. I mean, football might be his 3rd best sport. So it's just one of those things where we're going to have to wait this one out. He does not talk much. You got to go to his school to get him to do anything. And LSU is probably the team I would watch the most. The Ducks would be next. His cousin just signed with Miami. There's all kinds of things that could happen, but the Ducks are going to get an OB, and that's all you can ask right now.
Brian Smith, our Locked On Recruiting Insider here at the network, brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. Brian, thanks as always.
Thank you very much, sir.
Still plenty more to come here on this Thursday show. Who should Oregon men's basketball want to return? That's coming up next. Did you know that Fire TV is your destination for sports, from live games to highlights to in-depth analysis? Well, now you do. Fire TV offers amazing viewing experiences with smart TVs, as well as the Fire TV stick that you can plug into your existing TV that provides access to millions of movies and TV episodes, as well as free and live TV, whether it's opening weekend for baseball, which is finally here, the college basketball tournament, also here, great time of year. You're going to want to have a Fire TV. Fire TV channels deliver a constant supply of the latest videos from your favorite sports brands, all for free. That includes all of us here at Locked On. March Madness, NBA, Major League Baseball, and lots more. They've got everything to keep you up to date in the world of sports. If you haven't checked out Fire TV channels, you should. Trust me on this. To learn more, visit www.amazon.com/LockedOnFireTV. That's amazon.com/LockedOnFireTV to learn more. So Oregon men's basketball is into the offseason here after a fantastic run to win the Pac-12 tournament, win an opening round game against South Carolina because Dana Altman aligns Rubik's Cubes and doesn't lose in the first round, and then should have beaten Creighton, didn't. All right, offseason time. So biggest name that everyone's watching right now is KJ Evans, but I think another name to discuss is Bam Tracey. And, you know, as I understand it, no one's made an official announcement about whether or not they'll be returning to the Ducks aside from Jackson Shelstad, which is, of course, a great start. He was the Ducks' third leading scorer this year, starting point guard, and is going to be the point guard for the foreseeable future for Oregon, and is just crazy talented and explosive. I just love everything about Shelstad. He is everything that we hoped he would be, and I think he is going to continue to get better and better, much like Peyton Pritchard did, and who, of course, is his good friend and idol as a basketball player, hence the number 3. But Adrian Tracey, or Bam Tracey, as he's been come to know, is someone who I very much hope returns to the Ducks. So he came in from the JUCO ranks ahead of this past season, and you know, sometimes he came off the bench, and he was really in the starting lineup down the stretch quite a bit for the Ducks. And you know, he is not a lockdown defender. I talked about that in the reaction show to, you know, the Creighton loss and kind of breaking down that whole sequence. He is not a plus defender. And usually Dana Altman has got a lot of really good defenders. But I think for Bam Tracey, there are a couple things that he brings that make me want to have him back, even though he's not locking it down at that end of the floor, which is a big part of what Dana Altman wants to do, to be sure. Number one, he can shoot. And I thought that Dana Altman and his staff did a phenomenal job this past offseason of addressing what was a huge need. They didn't have enough shooting. They just didn't. But they brought in Shelstad, who can shoot. Cousinard got better. He increased his three-point percentage. I think he was around 35%. That was a career high. They brought in Bam Tracey, and Brendan Rigsby got back to what he, you know, is kind of capable of as a shooter this past year. He was really cold the second half of the year. Also someone that has said he wants to return to the Ducks, and I hope that he does, because I like having him off the bench. But I think Bam Tracey did a great job of being the shooter. You know, at the junior college, is the name of it's escaping me right now. He was about a 42% three-point shooter. He was somewhere in the low to mid 40s, and he had a good year shooting the three. And if you're Oregon, you got to have those guys. And look, do I automatically think Bam Tracey should be the starting 3 next year for the Ducks? Not necessarily. I think if either Tracey or Keyshawn Bartholomew or maybe Brendan Rigsby were, you know, a sixth man off the bench, that would be a testament to Oregon having a truly deep lineup. Like, I hope Mookie Cook can realize his full potential and be a starting caliber 3. But at the same time, he's going to be coming off an injury, won't be tremendously experienced because he's barely played, so he might have to work his way into the rotation, kind of like Shelstad did, right? Shelstad came off the bench to start the year, and as it progressed, it became very obvious this guy's the starting point guard, and that's where Oregon was by the end of the season. So I think that Bam Tracey could start at the 3, because, you know, we saw him do that and have some nice games and do good things for the Ducks over the course of this season. And as Mookie Cook adapts to the college game, he becomes a starting 3, and Tracey can slide to the bench. So that's the other reason, or one of the other reasons that I like him. And the other thing is he's got size. You know, he's about 6'5", 6'6", and Oregon doesn't have, at least on this roster right now, I'm curious to see how they kind of attack this in the offseason. They don't have a lot of size on the wing. They've got good size with their guards, but they don't have guys that are like between 6'6" and 6'8" or 6'9" playing on the wing, right? KJ Evans is, I think, listed at 6'9". He plays the 4, sometimes a smaller 5, and Folly Dante, Nate Biddle, and Mo Diawara, those are all 7-footers that you have at the 5 spot, and that's great. And Oregon certainly will need to add a big or two for depth in the front court, but they don't have a lot of guys. Cook is 6'7". Tracey, I think, is listed at 6'6". They don't have guys like that. Playing with a 3-guard lineup is okay, but if you think about the best Dana Altman team, that Final Four caliber team, or not caliber, they literally were in the Final Four, national championship caliber team, it was Peyton Pritchard, who's, pretty small at point guard, and Casey Benson, who's also not very big at point guard. And then you had Dylan Ennis, who was about 6'4". Tyler Dorsey was 6'5". Brooks was 6'7". That was a greater progression of size. Jordan Bell was playing, a small ball center at 6'9", but really they like playing Bell at the 5 and Chris Boucher at the 4, and Boucher was 6'11". So Dana Altman's teams have always, I think, been at their best when they've got sufficient size and defense on the perimeter and on the interior. And I think that Tracey, can get better defensively, and he just brings a size and rebounding component and shooting that makes me look at him and go, yeah, I want that guy to return. I want him back on Oregon's team. I think he can be a valuable piece for Oregon as they try to, just be an at-large team in the Big Ten next year. And, certainly the Big Ten has got a lot of really good teams. It'll be tougher than what the Pac-12 was this past season. But, I don't think it's a conference where Oregon goes in and they're at some huge disadvantage. Like, they're clearly the best basketball program, or at least the best basketball team from this year going into the Big Ten, right? Danny Sprinkle's at Washington now. He's a very good coach. I have no doubt that Danny Sprinkle will get Washington to an NCAA tournament level eventually. I don't know how quickly. It was kind of a unique situation last year where he brought over guys from Montana State and got the most out of them, and brought in a former Oregon player. Isaac Johnson, I think, was once upon a time a Duck very briefly, and he was a big part of that Utah State team that also got to the round of 32. Sprinkle will do a good job, but Andy Enfield at USC, I think, is expected to be the next coach at SMU, which is weird, very, very weird. And then you've got Mick Cronin at UCLA. I think he'll bounce back and be fine. Cronin's a very good coach. So Oregon's in a good position amongst the newcomers. And then you look at the Big Ten, you go, okay, Illinois is very good with Brad Underwood. Matt Painter at Purdue, again, a very good, consistent, steady presence as a basketball coach. And I think that for the Ducks, they are able to put themselves into the upper echelon with the Purdues and Illinois and Wisconsins if, everybody comes back and you add the right pieces. But I think having Bam Tracey there would be helpful. He's also got, they call him Bam because he's capable of throwing down. He's not an unathletic guy. So size, athleticism, shooting, can score a little bit inside and out, and just, a catch and shoot, knockdown sort of guy. Every team needs somebody like that, right? I think of that Peyton Pritchard team that didn't get to make a run in the NCAA tournament because it got canceled due to COVID. Anthony Mathis, I think, is what Bam Tracey kind of is. Not necessarily a plus defender, but gives you some size, little athleticism, and a healthy amount of shooting. I think Mathis was a little bit, more of a volume scorer than Tracey, but Tracey had a 20-point game against Stanford, and I think he had 6 or 7 games with 14 points or more. So I want to see him return to the Ducks, absolutely. And, Oregon definitely needs to add. You got to find somebody, and there are a lot of players in the portal. I'll touch on that in just a sec, but you got to replace Cousinard, you got to replace Dante, you got to replace Aquendo. So those are your guys that, played a key role this year. Cousinard and Dante especially. It's losing a lot, but I think the core infrastructure to build an at-large tournament team is certainly there. Make a Final Four run? We'll see. We'll see what sorts of players they're able to add. But on that note, a lot of players are in the transfer portal because it opens during March Madness, because the college sports calendar makes no sense. Nobody thinks about these things. They're like the Joker, He's like a dog chasing cars. I wouldn't know what to do with it if I caught one. I just do things. Let me know what you think of that impression below. But I think that's where the calendar's at for college football and basketball, and a lot of players are in the portal. And I think it's a good sign that none of the Oregon players that are thinking about returning are in the transfer portal, especially KJ Evans, right? Whose comment was, generating some headlines here and there about whether or not he, will come back, future undecided and everything of that sorts. but he's not in the transfer portal yet. And this kind of feels like the time where everyone is putting their name in. So, we'll wait on official word and certainly hope that these guys come back, because I think, the core is there, the experience, the belief, the culture, everything I think is there to set up for a successful season next year. You've just got to make the right offseason moves. You've got guys coming from low and mid or even high major schools that are able to come to your roster and contribute right away. And you got to find those sorts of guys. You need a shooting guard like Jermaine Cousinard, who can hit threes, can score, and can also defend. Cousinard was a trifecta in that sense, and he was huge for Oregon all season long, especially down the stretch. Not an easy guy to replace. And look, I don't think you have to go find someone who's going to, average 36 points per game in 2 NCAA tournament games, or have to find an Folly Dante type, but certainly you got to find some real production, some proven production. It's out there in the portal. I think Dana, with the momentum they created with this round of 32 run in the NCAA tournament, I think he'll be able to go get it. Appreciate everyone listening. I'll see you next time. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and go Ducks.